He's a retired police detective from Colorado. During his career, he got involved in investigating sex crimes, horrible sex crimes, not just against adults, but children as well. He's here to talk about the intricacies, the realities of investigating these vicious crimes, and how that has become his life's mission after retiring from police work. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The show was brought to you by OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services. They're dedicated to creating a safe environment, building trust, and enhancing the quality of life for their clients. They're committed to delivering quality service, safety, and security in an effective, responsive, and professional way. Get more details at oppsprotection.com. Contacting us from Utah, we have Dave Markel on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast. He's a retired police detective from Lafayette, Colorado, town outside of Denver. He got involved in all aspects of police work for certain, and we'll talk about some of that as well, but he got really deeply involved in investigating sex assault crimes, sex assault crimes against children, and that's become his passion. He's a podcaster. The name of his podcast is Sexual Assault Survivor Stories with Dave Markel. His website, markelconsulting.com. That's MARKEL-consulting.com. Dave, first, thanks for your service. Secondly, thank you for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. It is very much appreciated.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me. So did my career, so thank you. You
know, the funny thing you bring that up, and we just got done with Police Week, and every year I was in Washington for the Washington, D.C. area with radio for quite a while, and I had not gone to the memorial because I was desperately afraid that I would lose it. And my wife and I went, and I did. I lost it. It was cathartic, though. It was a healing thing for me. But every year, Police Week, I go into two things. I get melancholy for all those who were lost, who died in line of duty, but I also really get angry at the organizers, the departments, all that, because the original proclamation, I'm air quoting it, is to those who died in line of duty paid the ultimate sacrifice, but those who are also disabled in the line of duty. And we never, ever talk about them, whether it be mental or physical or both.
You're right. And I think it's a huge disservice to those who have suffered some sort of disability as a result of their service. Much of it, I think, is due to the trauma involved of the day after day seeing of how horrible humans can be to other humans.
Yeah.
And the thing that most people don't realize, if you don't do something about that trauma that you're experiencing, it's vicarious trauma for the most part for law enforcement, but there is actual trauma that does occur when you're in an accident, when you're shot at, when somebody's trying to kill you, whatever.
Right.
That trauma, if you don't do something with it, is cumulative and eventually causes all kinds of problems, post-traumatic stress disorder.
It does. And I've got some people I worked with that are in wheelchairs now from line of duty injuries that are paralyzed. Mm-hmm. And they may have retired young like I did. I got hurt and retired young. I was 33 when I was retired. But people think, and I used to think this, Dave, you hit the big ticket. It's easy street. Well, it's 66 2/3 of your pay, which is a lot less than what you're making before. And our health insurance tripled immediately the day I was retired. Yeah. It was a third of my pension.
On top of which, I mean, that financial disability, and hit, but also it ruins your quality of life. I mean, that aspect of it, thinking about not having as much money, is just a small portion of the fact that your life has changed. And moving forward is not an easy thing. And a big part of it is figuring out what you can do now. What do I do?
Like and this is part of your story. This becomes part of your passion, your mission in life. I'm no longer police. Now what am I? What do I do?
Right. Is there life after law enforcement? That's the big question. What do I do?
Well, the good news is you and I are both proof positive there's a big life after law enforcement. And
absolutely.
And it doesn't
Absolutely.
involve sitting at the bar drinking yourself to death and being a security guard, which is, thank God for both of those. It's not the case for me.
No.
But in your career, Dave, you got into investigating sex crimes. And I've got to say this. They were some of the most heartbreaking things I ever had to investigate as a police officer. I never did as a detective. My detective days were focused solely on narcotics investigation. However, when we did sex assaults, it usually was stranger-on-stranger rapes. And these were really difficult to solve. But the problem was when we had, and it wasn't often, but when we had sex assaults on children, it usually was from someone they knew, someone that ingratiated themselves in a family or a family member, and those were heartbreaking.
Yeah, and that's the case in almost 100% of the cases of child sex assault. Almost. We don't know the exact numbers, of course, because there's no way to find that out. But the truth of the matter is what you just said, is that family members, family on other family is extremely prevalent, and the problem in these situations, whether it's somebody in the immediate family or the extended family. And the problem with child cases is that most of the times children don't want to talk about it,
right,
or they're groomed in such a way that they're told and taught not to talk about it, and that if they do, there's going to be some sort of horrible consequence. If you tell anybody, I'll kill your sibling, I'll kill your sister, I'll kill your brother, I'll kill your parents. If you tell anybody, you'll never see me again, and life will be ruined for you and everybody around us. All kinds of things that children are fed, and they believe these things, of course.
Right.
And it causes them not to talk about it.
And I think it's important to say this, that as an adult, we go, that's preposterous. I would never fall for that. But we forget that we're talking about someone that's 5, 6, 7, 10 years of age, and their mindset is totally different.
Right. Or even younger. And that's a huge problem of it, too. When you're groomed and sexually assaulted from age 2, 3, 4, back before memory even starts, but then your lifestyle, your life experience is that's what happens. It becomes normalized in your own life, and you don't think anything's wrong with it until someday you have a realization from either other child or somebody who teaches you, don't let anybody touch these parts of you. And then there's this moment where life kind of caves in and they don't know what to do. And it's terrifying.
And the other thing is, and before we get into some specifics of cases you've worked, the other thing is, when I was young, when I was a kid, which was a long time ago, Dave, to be honest with you, we didn't worry about the things that we worry about today. We didn't worry about gaming devices. We didn't worry about social media. We didn't worry about the internet. Now you have predators actually seeking out children that they deem to be easy marks that are online from the privacy of your house.
Yeah, and that's a huge problem. Most parents don't monitor what their children are doing online. And you're absolutely right. When you get into even things as what most adults would consider innocent propositions, like a Facebook friend saying, hey, will you friend me? And you really don't know who that other person is or what their motivations are. So it may be a child looking for another child to be a friend with. At least that's the appearance, and really it's an adult. And then we get into some pretty severe computer sex crimes that, of course, law enforcement struggles with.
Yeah.
It's hard to catch these perpetrators.
And we'll talk a little bit about this. It's one thing to know who did this or to know what they do. It's something entirely different to develop what's called probable cause and have evidence for court. And you've got to have that. And it's all part of the investigative process, which we'll talk about in a few moments. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're talking with Dave Markel, retired police detective from Colorado. He is now living in Utah. In addition to his experience as a police officer, as a detective, he's also a podcaster. His podcast is called Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. And his website is markel-consulting.com. It's markel-consulting.com. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Keep yourself and your loved ones safe by opting for OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services. They offer armed security personnel who can protect you and ensure your safety at all times. They're dedicated to creating a safe environment, building trust, and enhancing the quality of life for their clients. They are committed to delivering quality service, safety, and security in an effective, responsive, and professional way. That's OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services. Get more details at OPPSprotection.com. Again, that's OPPSprotection.com. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is brought to you in part by Colonial Metals Group. Protect your family's financial future with gold and silver. Their level of professionalism makes it easy for you to learn everything you need to know about preserving all you've worked for. Take advantage of a special offer for our audience, and you'll receive a safe and up to $10,000 in free silver. Call 800-898-1841. 800-898-1841. That's 800-898-1841, or go online to colonialmetalsgroup.com/LET radio. Returning to our conversation with Dave Markel on a Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Dave is a retired police detective from Colorado. There's no life like being retired police. It is wonderful. He got involved in investigating sex assault crimes, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments. He's dedicated his life to helping sex assault survivors. He has a podcast, which is called Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, and his website is markelconsulting.com. It's markel-consulting.com. Dave, your police career, how long did you do the job, and then how did you get into, because most people that I know, you kind of gravitate towards something because you get exposed to it. You get thrown into an investigative capacity with sex assault crimes. It's not something that most of us seek out. Is that what happened to you?
Yeah, it was very interesting. In fact, being from Lafayette, Colorado, when I started, the department was what was considered in those days, and still is for the most part, a small department. I think there were 13 sworn officers and probably 6 or 7 office personnel. And I got it started with patrol division, did that for a little over a year, and my chief said, I want you to be our neighborhood watch coordinator and also do some crime prevention work. And so I did that for a little over a year, and then a detective opening came up, and there were only 3 detectives, so I put in for that position to be that third replacement detective after one of them retired, and I got the position, luckily. It was something that I'd always aspired to, but with not a whole lot of street experience, only 3 years really of being on the department, I had some idea of what I was getting into because I'd been in police work, but the idea of being a detective was not fully understood by me until I got the position. Initially, since you're in a small 3-man investigative unit, you're rotating that on-call position. You're taking all kinds of cases. But as the department grew, my chief decided to organize what he called the family crimes unit. And it was me and one other detective, and I was the lead investigator because I'd been involved in investigations longer. And he put me in that position, he said, because you've got children. You know how to deal with children. And a lot of this is going to be child abuse and child sex assault cases, but you'll also be handling domestic violence and adult rape cases.
All the horrible stuff.
Yeah.
There's nothing about that is good. All of that is bad stuff and difficult to deal with.
Well, and it's also a weird way to decide who becomes the family crimes detective. It's not the best method just because you've got children, you know how to talk to kids.
Look, you said that. I didn't say that. I'm agreeing with you. You're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just emphasizing that boy, what a horrible way to make that choice. But I embraced it because I did care about kids. I really wanted the best for children, and I wanted them to be heard. And so once I started doing these child investigations, mostly child sex assault cases, I think I probably ended up with somewhere around 15 to 20 cases a month were child sex assault cases, and multiple cases of domestic violence that also involved sexual assault. I also found out that there was a high arrest rate, especially in the child sex assault cases, because those weren't really hard to solve. Most of my arrests came from admissions, and I don't call them confessions, but admissions, because they don't confess so much as they do admit to certain things. And that aspect of it really shot up my arrest rate and stats, which I thought was awesome because it showed me that I was making an impact in the community. Plus, I was getting lots of really nice comments from the people whose children were being saved from horrible situations and from adults who were getting out of domestic violence situations. It just became a very fulfilling situation for me in my investigative work and in my career, and I enjoyed it. I couldn't have done what you did. Those drug cases, I did some of them, but I hated them.
Right.
They were very hard to prove. You were on drug dealer daylight time, and sometimes they showed up when they said they were going to show up for drug deals, and sometimes they didn't. You're sitting on surveillance waiting for things to happen that sometimes don't, and
right.
I just kind of got sick of it. So, yeah, when I was offered that position, even though the motive behind why I was offered it was wrong, I took it and kind of relished it and enjoyed it and did really well in it. My coping mechanisms kind of set in. I got a lot of pleasure out of taking the bad guys to jail. I didn't have to. Patrol was assigned to do transports from Lafayette to Boulder, where the jail was, but I generally took the person myself because it was part of my coping mechanism to put that person behind bars and to listen to the handcuffs going around their wrists as an arrest was made, those types of things. But it also gave me this vast opportunity to learn more about the human condition with interpersonal relationships.
Right.
And soon my chief put me in positions where I was instructing other law enforcement personnel on how to do these cases better, how to talk to victims and survivors and even witnesses, but also perpetrators. If you know how to talk to a perpetrator correctly, you are bound to get more admissions.
Absolutely. And by the way, I was recently interviewed actually a couple times, and one of the questions was, why'd you get in police work? And what was your calling? And part of it was, and I'm going to phrase this as a question for you, part of it was, I wanted to help protect those who are being bullied, those who are being victims of crime, and I want to do my part. There must have been a sense of satisfaction for you that you're actually rescuing people from harmful situations.
Absolutely. And I got letters of appreciation. I got notes from kids. I got kids drawing me pictures and things like that and dropping them off at the police department. Thank you for helping me. Yeah, there was a ton of gratification and really a lot of fulfillment in doing those cases. And
the other side of that coin is there's a very negative, dark side of this that I struggle with this for a long time. I call it the Superman complex. I coulda, shoulda, woulda. I'm not God. I'm not Superman. I couldn't have prevented that. And, I did my part, but the victim has got to go through so much stuff afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, where a big help came from the child advocacy centers. Not only were they there to help me in conducting interviews of children and child sex victims, but also support systems for the family in terms of guiding them into the recovery process of therapy and support and counseling that they needed to move on. But yes, I had the opportunity of staying in touch with some of those victims/survivors for years because of the things they had to go through and realized in their lives what a big impact those crimes had on their lives, and now they're out of that.
And unfortunately, you had the unique bond with them that most people don't have. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're talking with Dave Markel, retired police detective from Colorado. Talking about investigating sex assault crimes, especially those against children, how that's become his passion and mission in his life. And his podcast is called Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. Website, Markel-consulting.com. It's Markel-consulting.com. If you want to be a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, simply contact us. It couldn't be easier. You can send us a message on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show page, or email jay@letradio.com. That's jay@letradio.com. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Our sponsor, Colonial Metals Group, helped me with my goal of protecting my financial future. Being at the whim of the stock market or the current administration doesn't make me feel safe or secure. But having a self-directed IRA where I can safely store gold and silver, assets that have stood the test of time, no matter what the economy or the government policies are, makes sense to me. Colonial Metals Group has helped me create a self-directed IRA where I can have direct access to my assets. Let the team of experts at Colonial Metals Group help you protect your family's future. Their level of professionalism and ability to listen make it easy for you to learn everything you need to know about preserving all you've worked for. Maybe you're just thinking of getting started, or maybe you've already in a 401k or IRA. You're thinking about your parents' retirement. Regardless, Colonial Metals Group can help. We put together a special offer for our audience. Call 800-898-1841. 800-898-1841. That's 800-898-1841. Or go online to colonialmetalsgroup.com/LET radio. Return to conversation on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show with Dave Markel, retired police detective from Colorado. He's now living in Utah. Talking about investigating sex assault crimes and in his career and how that's become a passion for him today. Why he continues doing it even after retiring from police work. He has a podcast called Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, and a lot of his work can be found online at markelconsulting.com. That's MARKEL-consulting.com. Dave, before we went to break, you're talking about how you got introduced to this, and look, I get it. And by the way, I used to think, I don't think this way anymore, that when I was a city police, that the county guys had it, I say guys, that's men and women, they had it easy. The small departments had it easy. And I thought, man, we're out here, handling 30, 40 calls a night, getting shot at, and they're not doing anything. Yeah. And then I realized there's a lot less of them. They do everything from soup to nuts, and they see everything. Maybe not to the same frequency, but they get a lot more of it because there's a lot less of them.
Yeah. And I think that's spot on, John Jay, is the fact that even though you're in a small department, you're handling the same exact type of cases, maybe just not as frequently. And the fact that you are handling those same types of cases makes an impact on law enforcement personnel just the same in small departments as it does on large departments. And probably one of the most prevalent cases I think you'll see in any jurisdiction are domestic violence cases. And so anytime TV, I got called out on those as the family crimes lead investigator. I got called out on the majority of those. And it's not uncommon. It's probably more common than most people realize. The prevalency rate of sexual assault and rape within marriages and within interpersonal relationships is extremely high. Who in their right mind would think that, if it's domestic violence, which most people kind of connect with assault and beatings and maybe, some power and control issues of you can't leave the house and everywhere you go, you have to tell me. Those types of dynamics are there. But what they don't realize is that those same dynamics of power and control reach into their intimate sex lives. And so there's a lot of sexual assault and rape that goes on within marriages that people just aren't aware of.
Well, I think a lot of people are unaware that and this is a big part of the problem, is we walk around with a normal person's mindset. Now, this is how I think. This is how I react. And no, I'd never do that. That's a foreign concept. But a lot of people mistakenly make the conclusion that rape is a sex crime, and it's called a sex crime, but it's a crime of violence, dominance, and control. And it's usually very violent. And it's, I don't know how to describe to get through people, but it took a long time for me to get that through my thick head.
Well, and I think it's a big reason why my chief started sending me around the state of Colorado to teach in domestic violence and sex assault investigations, is the absolute importance of learning the dynamics of interpersonal violence and understanding that power and control wheel and that power and control aspect of relationships. If it is an abusive relationship, usually one of the two people has more power than the other and exerts it in very harmful ways. Yeah, violence, mind control, like I said, telling the other person where they can be, where they can't be, who they can be with, who they can't be with, what family they can associate with, which ones they can't. All of that is part and parcel of that interpersonal violence. But yes, unfortunately, the sex part is probably the most horrific, because you don't get victims in those situations who are willing to talk about that. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. It's hard to admit. And a lot of times they don't even recognize it as a crime. Well, I'm married to this person, or I'm common law married. I've been with this person for so long. I'm expected to perform sexually when he says or when she says that this is what I have to do. So I do it because that's part of the relationship. No, that's not the case. And all 50 states now have statutes that say that you can't rape or sexually assault your intimate partner. If one of them says no, it's just as any other situation where sexual power is being exerted. No means no.
And I got to be honest here. We're two men talking about this, and people say, well, what do you know about it? Well, number one, I'll talk a little bit about what I remember, what I was trained, but I can't believe we got to have the same conversations we had as kids. I was taught this stuff as a teenager by my dad, my mom. No means no. And there's no ambiguity about it. And we're still talking about it. One of the things we used to hear all the time, don't drink and drive. We still hear about that. Now we've got the don't text while driving. Don't be on the internet while driving. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that when we're old geezers. But we're still having the same conversations, and people don't seem to get it.
It's really sad. I think we live in what I call a rape culture, where rape has become almost normalized, to the point where when you hear about it, the question is more directed about what the victim did to cause it than what the perpetrator's mentality is. And unfortunately, that's the case in the majority of these cases, is that victims are asked questions by uninformed, uneducated law enforcement sometimes that say, well, why did you drink so much? Why were you dressed like that? Why were you even there? Why were you flirting with this person? All of these questions tend to place blame in the wrong place.
Right. Yeah. Look, I get that. I want to talk about two cases that I got involved. One was, I was a rookie, and I was brand new out of the academy, and it was it turned out to be a serial rapist, meaning he did this over and over and over again. And it was a young girl. She was like 15, 16, and she got sexually assaulted on her front porch by a guy that wound up having a speech impediment. And there are certain things that we call him the kissing bandit, because he'd always ask for a kiss afterwards. And I wound up catching him, spending many times on my days off going there and trying to find out who this guy was. And eventually we did. Secondly was, and this happens quite often, was a real estate agent that was doing an open house or showing a house to someone. And they had their photos in the paper. They're by themselves. They didn't know it. And this person got absolutely horribly brutalized. And one of the big questions that we were taught was just listen. Don't be judgmental. Just listen and get the facts as best you can. I'm sure you saw cases like that as well.
Absolutely, every day. And that's the sad part of it. And the situation is that law enforcement does need that important aspect of just listen. Don't make
just listen.
Just listen. And you'll get more information than you ever dreamed possible if you ask the right questions. Open-ended questions are great. That's what I teach now, is how to interview trauma victims without re-traumatizing them. And, of course, the five biggies for law enforcement is who, what, why, when, where, how.
Right.
Well, yes, you can get all that information without asking specifically those questions, which tend to shut people down who've been through trauma. What we want to do is open them up, make them feel safe. Once a person starts feeling safe with the person that's interviewing them, they're going to tell more. And so the important aspect comes down to asking open-ended questions in such a way as to make that person feel like they are safe. So a question like, what are you able to tell me about the sex assault? That what are you able part tells that person, oh, I don't have to remember everything, which people with trauma don't remember everything. They don't have to put it in chronological order. They don't have to have all these necessary things that most cops think they have to have. I need it in exact order. I need everything. Don't leave anything out. That's a complete non-understanding of what trauma does to the brain and to the mind. And so learning these things is exactly where my focus is, both with my training and consulting business and with the podcast, is talking to people in such a way that they feel safe. And that's what's amazing.
That's the most important
you get
thing.
Information you ever dreamed possible.
We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Dave Markel. He's a retired police detective from Colorado. He spent a large part of his career investigating sex assault crimes, domestic violence, sex assault crimes against children, all that stuff. He has a podcast called Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, and his website is markelconsulting.com. It's MARKEL-consulting.com. When we return, we'll talk more about what he's learned and how he's made a transition after retiring from police work and continues the same mission. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services, provides professional, safe, and effective security services in Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, and will be expanding to other states soon. And they're hiring security and protection professionals, off-duty and retired police officers, deputies, troopers, agents, and military in good standing are all encouraged to apply. That's OPPS, Operational Police Protective Services. Get more details at OPPSprotection.com. Again, that's OPPSprotection.com. Return our conversation with Dave Markel on the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast. He's a retired police detective from Colorado, and small town in Colorado outside of Denver. He wound up investigating sex assault crimes, domestic violence, sex assault crimes against children, child abuse, you name it. And he continues working even after retiring from police work, doing that. He has a podcast called Sexual Assault Survivor Stories with Dave Markel. And his website is markelconsulting.com. It's MARKEL-consulting.com. Dave, we're having a fascinating conversation. And in a lot of ways, it's like-minded people doing the same thing. But one of the first things we were taught when we had, didn't matter male, female, didn't matter their age, and maybe even more important with older people that were victims of horrible rapes, was that they were safe. I was not going to let anything bad happen to them. And quite often, they would tell, even though I'm obviously a guy, they would tell me everything that happened. But how important is letting people know they're safe, that you're not going to allow them to be harmed?
Well, I think it all has to do with the environment where you're asking them these questions and the manner in which you're asking them these questions. If you're asking, as I mentioned before, some kind of blaming type questions, they're not going to feel safe, and they're not going to want to talk about what happened, because they obviously recognize pretty quickly into that interview that you're focusing on their behavior, not the behavior of the perpetrator. So if you're asking the right questions in the right ways, you are going to be able to put them in a situation where they feel safe, where they feel comfortable. And as I mentioned, those questions are open-ended. What are you able to tell me? And once they start that narrative story, what they can remember about what happened, there's something called explicit memory and implicit memory. The explicit memories are memories they know they have, whether it was a hot case that happened just the night before, or whether it's a case that they finally got up the courage to discuss 3, 5, 10 years later. It's the same type of questions. And what you're trying to do with those explicit memories that they do remember is burrow down further by asking, well, tell me more about that. Or are you able to remember some of the things that you smelled, tasted, heard, saw, felt, what your body positions are? Because what the important thing is for law enforcement to understand is that when somebody goes into trauma, their cognitive part of their brain, the thinking part, basically shuts down. It's
Right.
not operating like it normally does. So the limbic system is taking over, the emotion, the idea that the brain is doing everything it can to survive. And when your brain is in that mode, its memory is focused on sensory perceptions, sight, smell, sounds, taste. So if we learn better to ask, tell me more about what you tasted, tell me more about the sounds that you heard. When we get that information, it actually corroborates their story, because we as investigators can then go back and look into some of the things that they've told us in their narrative and substantiate what they're saying. Because the majority of rape victims are telling the truth. They don't make these things up just for the sake of making these up. And there's research that's been done worldwide that shows that only about 1 to 8% of rape and sex assault cases are false, which means the other 91 to 99% are true cases. And if we get our minds in the right place as investigators and are asking those right questions that are sensory-based and based on taking that explicit memory and asking questions in such a way that it activates implicit memory, which is memory that's in the brain. They just don't know it's there until, because of something they say in an explicit memory, it actually activates that explicit memory, and then that explicit memory activates that implicit memory. We get more information than we ever dreamed possible. This technique can also be used on the stand by prosecutors who know how to talk to traumatized personnel and or not personnel, but victims and survivors. And when they're on the stand talking about these things in these ways, jurors grasp these situations differently than they do with a person who is asked to tell everything in chronological order and don't leave anything out. Well, that's trauma on trauma.
And that's not really how the mind works. And look, you've encountered this many times. I've encountered myself. There are certain things that if I tell you what I went through, logically, it doesn't make sense all the time. And sometimes, this is one that happened quite often. Before the advent of body cameras, I policed, and I was involved in some shootings. And one of the first questions they ask you is, how many shots you fired? And the answer is usually, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. You got to tell me.
It's a great example.
Right. And so, and we had different roles than, I was a police officer, then a police sergeant in patrol. We had different roles than your detective. And one of the things that we had to do, and then I promise you we'll transition into what you're doing today, is, and it sounds clinical and it sounds horrible, but we had to preserve evidence and set up the case for prosecution for court. So we protect the crime scene. We protect the when it came to the rape kit and the hospital examination, it was always horrible. So I always found it best just to let them and the parents know, this is what we have to do. And this is what's going to happen there. And this is a step from there. And then a detective's going to contact you, just so they weren't caught off guard.
John Jay, you've hit the nail on the head with helping victims and survivors get through these situations. It takes a huge amount of empathy and compassion and explaining things in the right ways and calm ways that help provide that net of safety that they feel. And what's important is that the research is showing that if a person is treated that way, if they're believed in the onset and they are treated with empathy and compassion and understanding, and they're allowed to tell their story in their own way, the long-term impact is that they don't have post-traumatic stress disorder, that they don't have long-term effects from that trauma.
Yeah, my hat's off to everybody that does this job. And I wish we could, and I'm sure you have the same thing, I wish we could prevent all this from happening to people, but we can't. Again, what I said earlier, I'm not God, I'm not Superman, and I can't prevent these things from happening. All I can do is my best at the time. And that's become kind of your life mission after retiring from police work. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. It's that ongoing desire to help victims and survivors get past their trauma and into situations where they can thrive, where they can excel, where they can keep living their life in spite of the fact that they've experienced one of the most horrific traumatic experiences a human can experience. In fact, research has shown also that rape and sex assault cases can be more traumatizing than even combat. It depends upon the person, but these types of cases hit deep down into a person's soul. It changes their worldview. It changes how they act. But if you treat them correctly and show them that compassion and ask the right questions and say the right things, they can survive and thrive in different ways. So, yes, that's exactly what compels me to keep doing what I'm doing, is to train and consult with agencies and anybody in the criminal justice system, but also in the mental health departments and hospitals, medical personnel. As you said, those are some of the most horrific cases that these people have to handle. If they are trained then on how to better address victims and survivors, the resultant fact is that they'll get more cooperation from those victims and survivors and be able to do their jobs better and then have better outcomes in their own lives. That vicarious trauma doesn't carry on as deeply. So yes, I teach law enforcement, I teach prosecution, all of the agencies that would have anything to do with victims and survivors are my audience, my target audience.
And you can find details about that at markelconsulting.com. That's markel-consulting.com. We're almost out of time. You also provide a platform with your podcast, Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. Tell us about that. What is your mission?
It's been amazing and surprising, quite frankly. That came from a training that I did up in New York State, where I was asked just to do a very short 4-hour presentation on the neuroscience of trauma and memory. And that was in the morning session. The afternoon session was a panel of 4 women who had been sexually assaulted on various campuses around New York. They came up to me afterwards and said, "Are you teaching the same information to victims and survivors about trauma and memory as you are to criminal justice personnel?" And I said, "No, I haven't taught victims and survivors." And they said, all 4 of them, "You need to. You have to start doing this, because what you taught to the people that are investigating these cases and prosecuting these also helped us. It answered questions as to why we have these intrusive thoughts, why we're having nightmares still,
why I'm getting angry, why I push people away, all that stuff." And we have to return and have you back as a guest on the show. Dave, thanks so much for your service, and thanks for being a guest on Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. All very much appreciated.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, John Jay.
A huge thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast version of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, by the way, which is a nationally syndicated radio show. And we broadcast on over 115 radio stations across the United States to more than 44 million combined population. If you like our show, there's 2 simple things you can do. Go to our website, letradio.com. Add your favorites. Check it often. You can find episodes of the show right there. And the second one involves our Facebook page. It's so easy to find great content, including past episodes of the show. And when you see something that you like, that resonates with you, be sure to share it with your friends. We'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.